The galaxy was not a quiet place. For thousands of years, countless civilizations had risen and fallen among the stars. Empires of crystal, empires of fire, empires of light. They had all fought for dominance, and they had all learned to fear the same shadow. That shadow had a name: the Zorath Dreadfleets. The Zorath were not explorers nor builders. They were conquerors, born in a furnace of war, their entire species molded by hunger for power. Their fleets were legendary, massive ships that floated like steel mountains covered in weapons that could split moons. They traveled from star system to star system, demanding surrender. If a species resisted, their homeworlds burned, their children enslaved, their histories erased. To many, the Zorath were not just an enemy, they were inevitability. A storm you could not fight, only survive by bowing low. When the Zorath first looked at Earth, they did not see a rival. They saw prey. Humanity was still young in the galactic stage. Their ships were small, their weapons old compared to alien technology. Humans had barely begun to stretch their reach across the stars, and most other civilizations whispered that they would fall quickly. The Zorath expected the same. The attack came without warning. Cities on Mars burned first, then the colonies on Europa, then Earth itself. Fire rained from the sky, and the blue planet turned red with scars of war. Billions cried out as towers crumbled and oceans boiled with falling wrecks. In a single week, humanity lost more than it had ever lost in any war before. But something strange happened in that fire. Humanity did not kneel. They did not beg for mercy. They bled, they screamed, but they stood. Soldiers who had never fought in space before climbed into broken fighters and faced enemy ships 10 times their size. Engineers whose hands once built peaceful machines turned factories into weapons for war. Even children hiding in shelters whispered promises that they would grow up to fight the monsters that had taken their homes. The galaxy watched, and for most, it was simply tragic. They believed humanity would fight bravely, yes, but then fade into silence like so many before them. No one believed humans could survive against the Dreadfleets. No one, except the humans themselves. In the ruins of Earth's greatest cities, in bunkers deep underground, leaders gathered. Generals, scientists, engineers, and survivors all asked the same question: how do you fight a storm? The answer was not elegant. It was not beautiful. But it was human. They decided to build something no alien had ever seen. Not a sleek ship designed to glide gracefully through the void, but a monster. A ship made of steel and stubbornness. It would not dance around enemy fire. It would endure it. It would not rely on alien elegance, but on human fury. The first design looked like madness. It was thick, ugly, and heavy. More armor than engine. More cannon than ship. Every other race in the galaxy would have laughed at the design, but the humans did not care. They were not building to impress. They were building to survive. The workers who built it worked with bleeding hands. The metal they welded was torn from ruined skyscrapers. The cannons they fitted were forged from melted-down civilian transports. The engines came from scavenged wrecks. Every piece of the ship carried the pain of loss. Every bolt hammered into its hull carried a promise: never again. When it was finally finished, it rose from the ground like a beast born from fire. It was not given a glorious name at first. The soldiers simply called it the gunship. To them, it was not just a machine. It was a shield, a fist, and a cry of defiance against the endless night. The crew that volunteered to fly it knew the truth. They knew this ship might not return from its first battle. They had seen what the Zorath could do, yet when they stepped aboard, their eyes carried no fear. Some had lost families. Some had lost homes. All of them had lost something they could never replace. But together they carried a fire the Zorath had never faced before. The galaxy believed humanity had entered its final chapter. The Zorath believed Earth would soon be ashes. But inside the dark hull of that first gunship, humanity began to write a new chapter, one written not with ink, but with steel, blood, and unbroken will. And as the engines roared for the first time, those who watched from below did not see just a ship. They saw hope rise into the stars. The first human gunship was a strange sight to behold. It did not shine like alien ships with polished silver frames or glowing crystals. It looked more like a fortress torn from the ground and hurled into the sky. Its armor was thick and uneven, its body scarred by the very metal it had been built from. To many, it seemed less like a starship and more like a floating weapon of rage. Even the engineers who built it whispered doubts. "It is too heavy," one said. "The engines will tear themselves apart," another argued. Some feared it would break apart the moment it tried to leave orbit. But the people did not stop. They had no choice. This ship was not born from perfect science. It was born from desperation, anger, and a refusal to surrender. Inside its armored walls, the gunship carried weapons no alien would dare design. Massive cannons lined its sides, their barrels glowing red when tested. Missile pods were fitted with warheads designed to pierce even the strongest shields. Hidden turrets were placed in every direction, so no enemy could circle it without tasting fire. The ship was not built to flee or hide. It was built to take punishment and give it back tenfold. The crew that gathered for its first mission was a mix of soldiers, engineers, and even civilians. Some had never set foot on a warship before, but every face carried the same fire. They were not chosen because they were the best. They were chosen because they were willing to risk everything for the chance to strike back at the monsters who had burned their homes. Captain Elias Ward stood at the bridge. His uniform was torn, the fabric patched more than once, but his voice was steady. He had lost his wife in the first wave of attacks. His son had been taken when the Zorath destroyed the colony on Mars. To him, this mission was not about survival. It was about justice. He looked at his crew and spoke simple words. "This ship is not just metal. It is every soul we lost. And today we will show the Zorath that humanity does not bow." We rise. The launch was rough. The engines shook the entire vessel, and alarms rang as systems pushed beyond safe limits. For a moment it seemed the doubters were right, that the gunship would collapse before it touched the stars. But then, with a roar like thunder, the massive ship broke through Earth's skies and climbed into the black sea of space. The crew cheered. People watching from bunkers and ruined cities cried with pride. For the first time since the invasion began, hope burned brighter than fear. It did not take long for the test to come. The Zorath had noticed Earth's new creation. They sent a scout fleet of 100 ships. To the aliens, this was not even an effort. 100 ships were nothing compared to their vast armadas. But it was more than enough to crush any resistance left on Earth. When the human gunship detected the incoming fleet, silence filled the bridge. One ship against 100. The odds were madness. Yet not a single crew member asked to turn back. They knew what they had signed up for. If they fell, they would fall loudly so the galaxy would remember. The battle began with a scream of engines and fire. The Zorath opened with plasma barrages, their energy beams slamming against the gunship's armor. The hull shook violently and metal groaned as though it would split apart. But the ship held. Then came humanity's answer. Cannons fired in unison, their blasts tearing through the void. Missiles streaked forward, weaving past alien defenses. The first Zorath ship exploded in a burst of flame and shattered steel. The crew roared as if the spirit of Earth itself had struck back. The fight lasted for hours. The gunship was hit again and again, pieces of armor ripping away, fire spreading inside. Still it fought. Its weapons glowed white from overuse, but they never stopped firing. When ammunition ran low, the crew rewired systems, cannibalizing parts of the ship to keep the guns alive. Every shot carried the fury of billions who had been silenced. One by one, the alien ships fell. 10 destroyed, then 20, then 50. The Zorath, who had laughed at this iron coffin, began to feel something they had never known in battle. Hesitation. By the end, the black sky burned with wreckage. The last alien ship tried to flee, but the gunship chased it down and destroyed it without mercy. One ship, a single human creation, had erased an entire fleet. The gunship did not return unharmed. Its hull was broken, its decks flooded with smoke, and half the crew lay silent forever. But it returned. Against all odds, it returned. When it landed, the people waiting on Earth fell to their knees, not in despair, but in awe. They had witnessed the impossible. Humanity had faced the storm, and the storm had bled. That day the galaxy changed. Humanity was no longer a prey species. They had shown that they could fight, that they could win. And though they had only one gunship, every alien mind who heard of the battle began to whisper the same word: Relentless. The victory of the first gunship spread across Earth like a spark in dry grass. People who had once hidden in fear came out of shelters to look at the skies with hope. The name of the ship was whispered in every corner. Children drew pictures of it on the walls of ruined schools. Survivors spoke of it as if it were alive, as if the spirit of humanity itself had climbed into the void to fight for them. But victory brought attention, and attention brought danger. The Zorath were not a race that ignored defiance. To them, resistance was an insult, and insults were punished with fire. The destruction of their scout fleet was not just a defeat, it was humiliation. Their warlords swore oaths of vengeance, and in the halls of their massive dreadnoughts they began to speak of Earth not as prey, but as a wound that must be burned away. The next attack was not a mere scout fleet. It was a proper strike force, heavier and sharper, meant to crush any dream humanity had begun to build. Hundreds of ships moved in formation, their engines glowing red, their cannons humming with power. To the Zorath, it was more than enough to erase the tiny spark of rebellion. The gunship rose again to meet them. Still scarred from its first battle, its hull patched with metal plates welded in haste. It carried a smaller crew this time. Many who had fought before were gone, their names etched into the steel of the corridors. But those who remained carried their memory like a shield. They knew the fight ahead could be their last, yet none stepped back. The battlefield was chosen near the broken remains of the Luna defense ring. Once it had been Earth's proud defense system, a ring of satellites armed with cannons designed to deter invaders. Now it was nothing but debris, shattered by the first Zorath attack. But the wreckage offered cover, and the humans intended to use every advantage. When the enemy fleet arrived, space seemed to darken. Ship after ship slid from hyperspace, their hulls shining with alien light. The Zorath commander laughed when he saw only one human vessel waiting. "One ship against hundreds," he said to his crew. "This battle will be short," but short it was not. The first volley came like a storm. Plasma beams and missiles streaked toward the lone gunship, filling the void with fire. The crew braced as the hull shook, alarms screaming. Whole sections of armor tore away, and one engine went dark. But the ship did not fall. It groaned, it bled, but it endured. Then came the counterattack. Human cannons roared, firing in patterns the Zorath did not expect. Missiles curved through wreckage, using broken satellites as shields. Railguns spat slugs at impossible speeds, tearing holes through alien armor. The gunship moved not with grace, but with fury, like a predator slamming itself again and again against prey far larger than itself. Every hit the gunship took seemed to make it fight harder. When one cannon melted, the crew rerouted power to another. When a turret was destroyed, soldiers carried munitions by hand to feed what weapons remained. Engineers worked waist-deep in smoke, patching broken systems while fire licked at their suits. No one rested. No one gave up. The Zorath, so used to easy victories, found themselves trapped in a battle they could not control. Their commanders shouted orders, but their ships began to fall. 10 destroyed, then 20, then 50. Each explosion lit up the void like a star, and with each one human voices cried out in defiance. Still, the cost was terrible. Fires spread across the gunship's decks. Casualties mounted. In the medical bay, doctors worked with shaking hands, using whatever tools remained to keep people alive. On the bridge, Captain Ward stood tall, though blood stained his uniform. His voice never faltered as he commanded his crew. "Hold the line," he said again and again. "As long as we stand, Earth stands." By the final hour, the battlefield was a graveyard of ships. Alien wrecks drifted in silence, their hulks broken and burning. The gunship itself was barely holding together, its engines coughing, its armor hanging in pieces. But it still fought. Even with only a fraction of its weapons left, it pressed on, chasing the last Zorath ships through the debris. The enemy tried to retreat, but humanity would not allow it. The gunship fired its last missiles into the fleeing vessels, turning them into flaming wreckage. When the silence finally came, there were no Zorath ships left. The lone human vessel floated among the ruins, alive against all odds. Cheers filled the ship, weak but fierce. On Earth, when the transmission of victory reached survivors, people wept openly. For the second time, humanity had done the impossible. They had stood alone against overwhelming force, and they had won. The Zorath could no longer laugh. Their warlords raged in fury. Their fleets trembled with unease. For the first time in their long history of conquest, they had faced an enemy that refused to break. And deep inside the battered gunship, where steel was cracked and fire still burned, Captain Ward looked out at the stars. His voice was quiet, but every ear on the bridge heard it clearly. This is only the beginning. The second victory shook the galaxy like thunder. News spread quickly, carried by frightened whispers and secret transmissions. A single human gunship had stood against hundreds of Zorath warships and survived. Civilizations that had once ignored Earth began to take notice. Some laughed nervously, saying it was only luck. Others stayed silent, unsettled by the thought that prey could bite back. For humanity, however, it was no longer about survival alone. It was about belief. The gunship had proven that the Zorath could be hurt, that their endless fleets were not untouchable. Factories hidden in underground bunkers roared to life. Engineers worked day and night, turning scrap metal and ruined satellites into armor and cannons. Every ruined city became a workshop, every broken colony a forge. More gunships were born. Each was different, built from whatever materials could be salvaged, but all carried the same soul. Thick armor, heavy weapons, engines built to burn hot even if they tore themselves apart. They were not elegant. They were relentless. Soldiers volunteered faster than ships could be built. Men and women who had lost everything stepped forward without hesitation, ready to climb aboard these iron beasts and face the void. The Zorath, meanwhile, could not understand. Their warlords met in chambers of fire and steel, arguing over how to handle the humans. To them, weakness should have meant surrender. They had crushed thousands of worlds before, and every race had eventually bent the knee. But these humans did not bend. Every time the Zorath struck, the humans struck harder. Every loss seemed to fuel them. The next battles proved it. A squadron of 3 gunships ambushed a supply fleet near Jupiter's orbit. The aliens expected an easy victory, but instead, their transports were torn apart in minutes. Another pair of gunships defended a refugee convoy, holding off waves of enemy fighters until reinforcements arrived. Again and again, human gunships appeared where they were least expected, tearing holes into the pride of the Zorath war machine. With every victory, hope grew stronger. In ruined cities, survivors painted the symbol of a gunship on broken walls, a mark of defiance. Children dreamed of one day serving aboard the Iron Giants. Families told stories of their battles, stories that gave strength to the broken-hearted. But hope did not come without cost. Every battle left wreckage. Every victory carried names that would never return. Inside the gunships, soldiers wrote letters they knew might never be delivered. Engineers carved the names of the dead into steel plates on the walls. The ships became not just machines of war, but floating memorials, carrying the weight of all who had fallen. Captain Ward watched this rise with quiet pride. He had seen humanity at its lowest when Earth burned and everything seemed lost. Now he saw people standing taller than ever. Their pain turned into fire. He knew they could not rest. He knew the Zorath would come again and harder than before. But he also knew something the aliens could never understand. Humans did not fight because they believed they would win. They fought because they refused to stop. The Zorath grew uneasy. Their fleets were vast, their weapons unmatched, yet their confidence began to crack. Warlords demanded answers from their commanders. How could a species so young, so weak, cause such losses? How could a handful of crude gunships tear through ships that had conquered empires? Spies sent to observe humanity returned with chilling words. They build ships from ruins, one reported. They do not wait for perfect design. They fight with whatever they can create. Another whispered, they do not fear death. Their dead become their strength. They are relentless. The word spread among the Zorath like poison. Relentless. It was not a word they used often, for their enemies always broke before true relentlessness was tested. But now for the first time they faced an enemy that fought not with numbers, not with technology, but with unyielding spirit. In hidden stations orbiting dead moons, more gunships rolled out of docks. Crews lined up in silence, eyes burning with determination. Humanity was no longer just defending Earth. They were taking the war to the stars. Every strike reminded the galaxy that the Zorath were not invincible. Every battle left behind wreckage that screamed one truth. Humanity would not kneel. The rise of the gunships was not just a military campaign. It was a message. A message written in fire, steel, and sacrifice. A message that reached not only the Zorath but every civilization watching from the shadows. Humanity does not surrender. Humanity rises. Again and again until the stars themselves burn out. The Zorath had finally lost patience. The small, stubborn race of humans had humiliated them too many times. Their ambushes, their relentless gunships, their refusal to surrender, it had become a stain on the pride of the warlords. No empire could allow such defiance to live, and so the order was given, release the Dreadfleets. These were no ordinary fleets. They were the pride of the Zorath, forged in the forges of dying suns, powered by reactors that devoured entire moons. Each dreadship was a mountain of steel and fire and sacrifice. Logic said they could not win. Numbers said they would be erased. But humanity had long stopped listening to numbers. The day came when the sky above Saturn turned black. The rings of the giant planet glowed with fire as the first dreadships arrived. Their cannons lit up the void like falling suns, and waiting for them, hidden among the icy rocks of the rings, were the human gunships. The first strike was sudden. Engines roared and the gunships burst out of hiding, raining torpedoes onto the Zorath fleet. The opening attack shattered dozens of cruisers before the enemy even realized what was happening. But once the shock faded, the real battle began. The Dreadfleets moved like giants. Their cannons spat storms of plasma, tearing apart asteroids and vaporizing anything in their path. Whole gunships disappeared in single blasts, reduced to dust in the blink of an eye. But for every ship that fell, two more surged forward. The humans fought not with fear but with fury. Their weapons pounded against armor many times stronger than their own. Their engines screamed as they darted between the giants, striking and vanishing like wolves among herds of beasts. Inside the gunships, every crew knew the odds. They wrote their last words into black boxes. They pressed their hands against cold steel before battle, whispering names of loved ones. And then, without hesitation, they threw themselves into the fire. Captain Ward's ship led the charge. His voice echoed through the comms, steady and calm. We are humanity. We do not kneel. Make them remember that. His words became a fire in the hearts of every soldier, even as ships exploded around them, even as the void burned with the deaths of comrades. No one faltered. The battle raged for hours. The sky was filled with wreckage, a graveyard forming in real time. Gunships that could no longer fly rammed themselves into enemy cruisers, detonating their cores in acts of final defiance. Pilots who lost their weapons turned their ships into missiles. It was not strategy alone. It was sacrifice, raw and unyielding. The Dreadfleets began to slow. They had expected an easy victory. Instead, they were bleeding. Their mighty ships were scarred and broken. Their warlords, watching from command thrones, shouted in anger as human gunships refused to stop coming. Every human death seemed to give birth to another strike. Every explosion carried the roar of defiance. At one point, a squadron of 5 gunships, their hulls cracked and burning, charged directly at a dreadship. They flew through storms of fire, losing one after another until only a single battered vessel remained. That last ship did not turn away. It slammed into the dreadship's reactor core, and the resulting explosion lit up the rings of Saturn like a second sun. One dreadship was gone. Humanity had slain a giant. The roar of victory spread through the comms. For a brief moment, amidst all the loss, there was hope. The impossible had been done. The Dreadfleets could be hurt, but the cost was terrible. The battlefield was littered with the broken remains of gunships, their crews gone forever. Families would weep for generations over the names carved into the void that day. Yet even in grief there was pride. Humanity had stood against the greatest force the galaxy had ever known and had not broken. When the battle ended, both sides were scarred. The Zorath had won the field, but their pride was shattered. They had unleashed their greatest weapon and had not crushed the humans. The galaxy watched in silence, realizing a new truth. Humanity could not be erased. From that day, one name spread across the stars, whispered by both friend and foe. They were not just humans anymore. They were the relentless gunships. The ruins of Saturn's battlefield floated silently, a graveyard of steel and fire. Shattered dreadships drifted beside the broken remains of human gunships, both locked in eternal silence. Yet from that silence, the galaxy heard a roar louder than any cannon. Humanity had stood against the impossible and survived. For the first time, the Zorath warlords felt fear. It was a strange thing to them, a poison they had never tasted. Entire empires had fallen before their dreadfleets without resistance. Yet here was humanity, broken and scarred, refusing to kneel. Even in victory, the warlords sensed something had shifted. Their commanders whispered doubts, their soldiers hesitated. The dread that had once been theirs to command now turned against them. On Earth, battered cities shook with grief and pride. Families lit candles for those who would never return, their tears falling on names carved into walls of stone and steel. Yet in those same ruins, children drew pictures of gunships with bright flames for engines, their voices filled with dreams of fighting back. Factories burned brighter, forges roared louder. The scars of war did not weaken humanity. They became fuel. Captain Ward stood in the command hall of the last surviving gunship from Saturn's defense. His ship was cracked, half its systems destroyed, but it still lived, like its crew, like its people. He walked among his soldiers, speaking quietly, reminding them that their sacrifices had not been in vain. His words were not grand speeches. They were simple truths. They bled. Remember that. Giants can bleed. Meanwhile, in the farthest corners of the galaxy, whispers grew louder. Alien races who had once bowed to the Zorath now dared to hope. Some smuggled weapons to Earth. Others offered information in secret. None were brave enough to rise openly, but they watched, waiting for the humans to prove the nightmare could be broken. The Zorath could not allow this tide of fear to spread. Their warlords gathered again, furious and desperate. They demanded a new plan, a final strike. Humanity must be crushed, they declared, no matter the cost. But beneath their fire and fury was unease. They could not say it aloud, but the truth gnawed at them. If a small, fragile species could bring down even one dreadship, what would happen if more joined them? In hidden spaceports across the solar system, humanity prepared for that very future. More gunships were rising, faster than ever before. Some were crude, patched together from scrap. Others were marvels of desperate engineering. None were flawless, but each carried the same soul of defiance. Soldiers lined up to crew them, not because they believed they would live, but because they believed humanity must stand. One night, as the battered Earth rotated under a sky filled with scars of war, Captain Ward looked out at the stars. He thought of the dead, of the families left behind, of the children who would one day ask what it meant to be human. He whispered to himself, not in anger but in quiet determination, "We fight because we must. And as long as one gunship rises, we are never broken. The galaxy trembled, not from the roar of cannons, but from the knowledge that something unstoppable had begun. The tide had turned. Fear no longer belonged to humanity. It belonged to the Zorath. And somewhere in the cold silence of space, the relentless gunships burned their engines once more. The galaxy would never forget what happened next. The Zorath believed their Dreadfleets were eternal, that nothing short of a dying star could challenge their might. But when the human gunships returned, scarred, battered, yet burning with unbroken spirit, the illusion shattered forever. Across the void, the Dreadfleets moved like a wall of darkness. They had come to finish what they started, to crush the ember of resistance before it became a wildfire. But the ember had already become a blaze. Humanity had rebuilt. Factories roared. Soldiers volunteered faster than ships could be built. And every hull, every weapon, carried the memory of the fallen. The second great clash began in the cold reaches beyond Neptune. The dreadships unleashed firestorms that lit the blackness, yet the human gunships darted between them, fearless. They fought like creatures who had already accepted death, and in that acceptance they found freedom. One ship could cripple a cruiser. A squadron could bring down a giant. The relentless gunships were no longer just a fleet, they were a storm. Inside the command bridge of his scarred vessel, Captain Ward gave no speech, only a single order. Break them. His crew moved with silent fury, their eyes shining with something stronger than hope, conviction. Every maneuver, every strike, was executed not for glory, but for survival, for the future of Earth, for the children who deserved to see the stars without fear. The battle raged for days. Dreadships burned one after another, their mighty reactors tearing holes in the void. The Zorath warlords screamed in disbelief as their fleets crumbled. The monsters who had once been nightmares to the galaxy were now the hunted. Their pride broke before their fleets did. Some fled, abandoning their own, while others fought on in blind rage only to meet the same fiery end. And then, the unthinkable happened. The last of the dreadships, massive, scarred, its armor cracked, faced a swarm of dying human gunships. Engines aflame, weapons exhausted, the humans did not hesitate. They rammed, they burned, they tore into the giant like wolves tearing down a beast. One final explosion split the silence of space, brighter than any sunrise, and the last dreadship was no more. The galaxy fell silent. In the ruins of the battlefield, among drifting wrecks and ashes of stars, humanity stood alive. Broken but alive, terrified but unyielding. And as word spread, the universe itself seemed to shift. Species long enslaved whispered in awe. Planets under Zorath control stirred with rebellion. The fear that once belonged to humanity now spread like a plague among their oppressors. The relentless gunships were not just a fleet. They were a message carved into the stars. Humanity would not kneel. Humanity would not break. Captain Ward, standing on his bridge, gazed into the endless dark. His ship was failing, his body weary, but his voice was steady. We are small, but we are endless. Remember us, and across the stars they did. The Zorath Dreadfleets were shattered, their terror undone. The galaxy no longer spoke of human fragility. It spoke of human fire. From that day forward, one truth echoed louder than any cannon. The universe would fear the relentless gunships.